My talk is PM2.5, the most demonstrable science fraud of our time. And I mean every word of that, the most demonstrable science fraud. So just a little bit of background on me. I've got a background in science, statistics, and law. I have, for the past 30 years, I have worked on environmental issues in from a variety of platforms. I've worked for a coal company. I've worked a little bit in politics. I've been a columnist for Fox News. I've been a consultant. I have led and been affiliated with various think tanks. I've written a number of books. This is my first one from the 90s. It was sort of a primer on how to, create health scares. Try to do it tongue in cheek. I've always tried to talk about this stuff in very plain language so people can understand it, because people's eyes often glaze over when you get to science. My second book was about how actual science was being silenced by activists. My book, Junk Science Judo, is sort of a self-defense manual for the average person, how to know when something they read about in the media is junk science. And I define junk science as bad science used to advance a special agenda. So like trial lawyers, regulators, politicians, businesses, activist groups, the kind of people I'm talking about. I wrote this book about 10 years ago. This was a bestseller as well. This goes to the motivations of the environmental movement, how they're trying to control our lives through environmental regulation. As Theo said, this is my most recent book, Scare Pollution, and the material that we're going to go through now about PM2.5 is covered in more detail in this book. This whole book is about this PM2.5 journey that I've been on. So, I have, like everybody, I have my biases. I am for small government, maximum freedom for people. Free enterprise is the heart of economic growth. I like facts and reality. In the past 30 years, I've worked in all these different formats: consultant, think tanker, activist, publisher, mutual fund manager, corporate executive. So I've got lots of experience. So the key question for today is, does inhalation of PM2.5 kill anyone? Now, let's first talk about what is PM2.5. Well, it's just fine particulate matter, dust or soot. 2.5 means it's smaller than 2.5 millionths of a meter. PM2.5 comes from smokestacks, tailpipes, chimneys, smoking anywhere where there's combustion. It's those are the man-made sources. The natural sources are dust, pollen, mold, forest and brush fires, and volcanoes, and there are probably other sources I haven't listed. But you get the idea, just soot and dust. PM2.5 is very small. It's about 1/20th the width of a human hair. So you can put 20 PM2.5 molecules across the diameter of a human hair. It's very small. And the way the theoretical mechanism how this kills people is you inhale it, it goes deep into your lungs, and it crosses the barriers into your blood vessel and somehow wreaks havoc. Now, why is PM2.5 so important? Well, this is an example from earlier this year, a study from Harvard University, where they are claiming that particulate matter in the air, and they're not talking about particulate matter from like pollen or dust, they're just talking about particulate matter from smokestacks and tailpipes. So man-made particulate matter. They are claiming that particulate matter in outdoor air kills more than 8 people a year, and that's about 1 in 7 deaths. That's a lot of deaths if this is true. How is PM2.5 misused? Well, the government, especially in the United States, uses PM2.5. They've started regulating PM2.5, the EPA, US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, in 1996. Started issuing air quality rules, national air quality standards for particulate matter. That started in the Clinton administration. In the Obama administration, they started using particulate matter as a proxy for climate, and they tried to reduce coal plant emissions and claimed that by reducing PM2.5, they were also reducing CO2 emissions. So PM2.5 is this very potent regulatory tool in the United States. The Obama administration used it to virtually destroy the U.S. coal industry. By the time Obama left office, 95% of the market value of the coal industry in the United States had been destroyed. All the top companies had gone into bankruptcy. Now, how does this work? How does EPA use PM2.5? Well, they use it. It becomes it's useful in the benefit cost analysis, because if you imagine, as EPA does, or claim as EPA does, that their regulations are saving tens of thousands of lives per year, and every life EPA values at $10 million. Well, if you do the simple math of 10,000 lives times $10 million, then regulations. Then a regulation would produce $100 billion in benefits. And of course, there's no cost that industry has that can come close to $100 billion. So this was a way for EPA to circumvent normal cost benefit analysis. Now, these are the three key assumptions for PM2.5. Inhaling it kills people, especially EPA says the elderly and sick people are particularly vulnerable to PM2.5. EPA says that any inhalation of PM2.5 can kill, even one molecule. Okay, even one molecule can cause death. And death can occur in the short term, within hours or days after inhaling that one molecule, or in the long term, after decades of inhaling molecules. So you should already be starting to ask questions in your mind about this. Does this really make sense? So in a nutshell, particulate matter, PM2.5, is the most toxic substance known to man, according to EPA. There is no other substance on the planet that kills by means of any exposure. One molecule. EPA says one molecule can cause death, or a lifetime worth of breathing molecules, either one. I guess whichever comes first. Now, this is, I found this nice picture of the Netherlands, beautiful blue sky. Your average, I want you to keep this number in mind as we talk here, 12 micrograms per meter cubed. That's how much PM2.5 is in average air. Blue sky air has 12 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, EPA says that population death rates increase by 1.2% for every 10 microgram increase in PM2.5. And that increases from zero exposure, because once again, the only safe exposure is no exposure. And strong evidence that death can occur within the short term, which is hours and days. And those are quotes. If you think I'm making this up, this excerpt here is from the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. The person that wrote this was the chair of the EPA's outside air quality science advisory groups, a guy named Jonathan Samet. And he writes that there are no thresholds below which there is no risk at all for ozone and particulate matter. Another example, if you think I'm making this up, this is Lisa Jackson. She was the Obama administration's first EPA administrator. In 2011, she testified to Congress as follows. This is very important. She says, particulate matter causes premature death. It doesn't make you sick. It's directly causal to dying sooner than you should. And then she added, if we could reduce particulate matter to levels that are healthy, we would have an identical impact to finding a cure for cancer. These are fairly dramatic statements. So there's an expression in America, I don't know if you have it, jumping the shark. It just means being so ridiculous, you just debunked yourself. So the EPA chief said that basically PM2.5 kills 570,000 Americans per year. That's the number that die from cancer, which is about 1 in 4 U.S. deaths annually. And you'll see that, I'm not really exaggerating what she's saying, because recall from February of this year, the Harvard study that said PM2.5 kills 8 million people around the world. Now, so here's our first thinking point. So blue sky air in America, because our air is actually cleaner than yours. Blue sky air kills 570,000 Americans per year. On the other hand, smoking, keep in mind that smokers also breathe the same blue sky air, but somehow smoking only kills 440,000 Americans per year. How is that possible? How is that possible? So faced with all this ridiculousness, I wrote an article in the Washington Times, which is one of the newspapers locally here, and I challenged EPA, show us the bodies. If there are so many Americans killed every year by PM2.5, show us the bodies. A couple weeks later, EPA testified in Congress that they responded to what I had written. They said these deaths are not fabricated. They're based on peer-reviewed science, both clinical and epidemiologic studies. Okay, fair enough. Now, EPA claims there are 3 lines of evidence to support its claim that PM2.5 kills. Epidemiology studies. Epidemiology is the study of disease patterns in human populations. Toxicology, see what happens when you poison animals with whatever substance. And clinical studies are human testing, see what happens when you try to poison people. So EPA, let's start with the epidemiology. EPA says that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies that support the notion that PM2.5 kills people. Now, all these studies remarkably report similar statistical correlations between outdoor monitor measurements of PM2.5 and increased death rates. Now, let's just keep in mind that epidemiology is not science, it's just statistics. That's why you get these statistical correlations. But the reality is not quite what EPA wants you to believe. All these studies, all the hundreds or thousands or however many there are, they all have very poor quality data. There is no actual exposure data in any of these studies. In none of these studies do the researchers know how much PM2.5 was actually inhaled by any of the study subjects. The PM2.5 measurements come from air monitors, which tend to be located near roads where cars drive by and dust is kicked up. And that is how they measure air quality. But no one actually measures how much PM2.5 is inhaled by any of the study subjects. On none of the death certificates does it say anyone died from PM2.5. People die from all sorts of reasons: heart disease, lung disease, cancer, this and that and the other thing. But no one ever blames any death on PM2.5. As I mentioned before, all these epidemiology studies, they all feature weak correlations, which, and this is, we could probably do a whole other lecture on this, just harvesting statistical noise at best. The EPA is famous for ignoring contradictory studies. There are lots of contradictory studies on PM2.5, studies that show no correlation between PM2.5 monitors and increased deaths. EPA also has this very corrupt peer review process where EPA pays researchers to do the research, and then it convenes these same researchers to review their own work and to rubber stamp it and say how wonderful it is. But even if you don't believe anything that I said before, I once sued EPA about PM2.5, and EPA had this sentence in their court filings: epidemiologic studies do not generally provide evidence of direct causation. So EPA and I can agree on this point. Epidemiology does not show that PM2.5 kills anyone. It's not, even if the epidemiology was any good, it's not sufficient. So you need some toxicology or some other science to back up the epidemiology. So EPA has over the decades poisoned thousands of animals with PM2.5. This picture I'm showing you here is some mice that are jammed in a tube and forced to inhale PM2.5. And you have to force them to inhale PM2.5 because animals, like humans, will not inhale air that is, polluted. They won't inhale it deeply. They'll inhale it shallowly, which is different. It's why in studies of animals, you can't make, for example, dogs get cancer from smoking because they will not inhale the tobacco smoke deep enough. So EPA, remember I said that in the Netherlands, the amount of PM2.5 in your air was 12 micrograms. These animals are getting 1,000 or 2,000 micrograms per meter cubed. And despite those drastic exposures and the fact that they are forced to inhale that PM2.5, no animal has ever died. So let's move on to clinical testing. Now, over this next section, if you've ever heard of the name Joseph Mengele, his name will immediately pop into your mind. Let's keep in mind that EPA says that even one molecule of PM2.5 can kill you, and the elderly and the sick are particularly vulnerable. This is a picture of the University of of a laboratory at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, run by EPA, where they take exhaust from the truck you're seeing there, and they pump it into a gas chamber where they expose people to see if particulate matter kills. This is a picture of the gas chamber. This is no joke. This actually happens. And who are they testing PM2.5 on, this diesel exhaust PM2.5? Well, on sick people. Here's an advertisement where they're looking for people with metabolic syndrome. That means people overweight, heart troubles, up to 55. So they're looking for sick people. They're looking for elderly people. This is another ad, up to 75. I have another. There was one of these experiments where they were looking for people up to 80. Remember, EPA says the elderly are particularly vulnerable. They're even looking for adults with asthma, older adults with asthma. Okay, I mean, these are, once again, let's go back to this. EPA says that even one molecule can kill you, and the elderly and sick are particularly vulnerable, and that's exactly who EPA is testing this on. Now, what does EPA tell its human guinea pigs? Well, it says that during the exposure to the particulate matter, you may experience some minor degree of airway irritation, cough, shortness of breath, or wheezing. Well, but EPA tells the world that PM2.5 kills, right? All governments tell people that PM2.5 kills, but here EPA has these human guinea pigs. It says that they may cause some wheezing. There's no mention of death in the disclosure, right? Now recall, Netherlands, 12 micrograms per meter cubed, blue sky air. How much PM2.5 is EPA making people breathe? 600 micrograms per 50 times more. And I actually have documents that show EPA, this number was actually, in one case, went up to 750 micrograms per meter cubed. Okay, so EPA is making these elderly and sick people inhale massive amounts of PM2.5 for 2 hours at a time. Okay, so so look at all this. The 600 micrograms, that's 60 times greater than the PM2.5 in average US air, 17 times greater than the maximum allowed, and an undefined times greater than what EPA says is safe. Remember, the only safe level is 0, and anything divided by 0 is undefined. So why was EPA doing this? Why was EPA testing high concentrations of PM2.5 on elderly and sick people? Well, in my litigation, EPA told the court, well, these studies help us determine whether the mathematical associations, the correlations between PM2.5 and health effects are biologically plausible. Because if they're not biologically plausible, then the epidemiology studies don't mean anything. So what are the results from EPA's testing? Was anyone killed? Well, of course not. Because EPA would be guilty of crimes against humanity if anyone was killed. And in fact, EPA boasted to the court when I sued them that no one had been killed. No harm or injury, let alone death. Okay? So I have put EPA in this box. If particulate matter, a logical box, if PM2.5 is as lethal as EPA says, then it has committed crimes via its human testing program, violating the Nuremberg codes, because it has tried to kill people. If these crimes were not committed, then EPA has lied to the public and Congress and everybody else about the dangers of PM2.5. There's no way out of this box, no escape hatch. So let's start, now we've gone through the lines of evidence, the epidemiology, the animal toxicology, and the human clinical studies. Let's talk now about PM2.5, reality, just real life experiences. So EPA says PM2.5 can kill in hours. From average, any inhalation can kill in hours. Well, the average outdoor breather in America inhales 10 micrograms per hour. We don't see people dead all over the place. In a car with a smoker and the windows closed, you can inhale 4,000 micrograms in an hour. A smoker can inhale 40,000 micrograms in 5 to 10 minutes. And, smoking is not known to kill anyone from just smoking a single cigarette. For a marijuana joint, I think, marijuana is becoming legalized in the United States, and I think it's already legalized in the Netherlands. A smoker of marijuana can inhale 180,000 micrograms in minutes. Have you ever seen someone die from smoking marijuana? And, we give marijuana to sick people, to cancer patients, to alleviate their pain. Does it kill them? No. In a hookah bar, of course, you can be exposed to the PM2.5 equivalent of 100 cigarettes in one session. Now let's look at, those are short-term exposures. Let's look at long-term exposures. These exposures, this is what most of EPA's epidemiology studies are. But you got to ask yourself the question, if PM2.5 can kill in hours, how does EPA know that a long-term death wasn't really a short-term death, right? If one molecule can kill you, how do you know that if you die at 80 from PM2.5 that it wasn't one molecule versus everything you've inhaled over your lifetime? Coal miners breathe an incredible amount of PM2.5. In the United States, coal miners were allowed to breathe 2,000 micrograms of PM2.5 per hour. But miners had a greater life expectancy than average workers. But this is really my favorite part right here. There was this study in the New England Journal of Medicine, and there's plenty of studies like this. They basically say that you can smoke a limited amount till you're about 40, and then if you stop smoking when you're 40, you can have normal life expectancy. If you do the math, so a lifetime non-smoker in the U.S. for 80 years will inhale 7 million micrograms of PM2.5. Someone who smokes for 15 years, let's say from 25 to 40, half a pack a day for 80 years, they'll inhale that 7 million micrograms from outdoor air, plus another 2.19 billion micrograms from smoking. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Well, I tried to illustrate this the best way I could. On the left, you see the 2 sugar packets. That's the amount of PM2. If you're a non-smoker, that's the amount of PM2.5 that you will inhale over the course of your lifetime. 2 sugar packets worth. On the right, you see a 4-pound bag of sugar. If you're the limited smoker I described before, that's how much PM2.5 you will inhale over your lifetime. And guess what? These 2 people will have the same life expectancy. So how can PM2.5 kill over the long run if these people have the same life expectancy? It's impossible. Here's another one. In the US, our average outdoor PM2.5 is 10 micrograms, life expectancy 79. Guess what? In China, now granted, this is Chinese data, so who knows how accurate it is, but their air quality is 10 times worse than the US, and their life expectancy is greater. Is that possible? Well, if you believe the Chinese, then it is. Now, there have been 3 incidents of deadly air pollution during the 20th century that are typically blamed on PM2.5. Anytime EPA starts talking about 2.5, they start talking about Moose Valley, Donore, Pennsylvania, and the London fog. This is a picture of the Moose Valley, 1930. This is Donore, Pennsylvania, 1948. You can see how dark it is. That picture is taken around noontime. That's how bad the air pollution was. And this is the London fog. Now, If you don't know anything about these incidents, then you're going to fall for EPA's propaganda. But if you look at the actual research following them, find that all three pollution events were caused by weather inversions, where air in the lower atmosphere gets trapped. Okay? And if you don't shut down the industrial facilities, which are, back in 1930 and 1948 and 1952 were not really regulated, then you just have all these gases going into the atmosphere, the lower atmosphere, but the weather won't let them escape, so they're concentrated. So the result was these acidic gases trapped in the air harvested, killed people that were vulnerable to that level of acidic air. We also, and I should also note that the London event is also confounded by a simultaneous influenza epidemic. So the numbers of, I know that people say like anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 died in London, but a lot of those are probably influenza deaths. So, my theory after all this is if there is deadly air pollution, it's because there's acidic gases in the air. And I can prove this today. There's still bad air all over the world, primarily in Asia. In Delhi can be particularly bad. Here's an example where the PM2.5 level is 706 cubic micrograms or micrograms per cubic meter. Remember, in the U.S. it's 10, and in the Netherlands the number is 12. But here in Delhi it was 706. But no one's dying. And why is no one dying? Well, if you look to what I've circled, the sulfuric acid, the sulfur particles, the acidic particles are very low. It's in the safe range. So particulate matter is really innocuous unless there's acidic gases in the air, which of course doesn't happen anywhere, even on the worst days in India or China. So how does EPA get away with this? Because EPA has failed our tests of epidemiology, toxicology, human experiments, and reality. EPA has been able to rely on it can scare industry, and EPA regulates industry in America. It can terrify industry into not challenging EPA. There's public ignorance, confusion, and apathy. Everyone cares about the environment. No one wants to learn anything about it. We have the activist groups and, captured media. They just, act as mouthpieces for EPA. And in Congress, it's just too complex. They're very busy. It's very difficult to get Congress to do anything. But the most outrageous part of what EPA has done is what I call secret science. EPA has not been willing to share its epidemiology data forever. I mean, people have been asking EPA for its epidemiology, for its key studies going back to 1994. Congress has asked for them. Congress has tried to pass bills. When the Trump administration ran EPA, we even passed a rule, a science transparency rule. Could never get this data out of the bowels of EPA. EPA pays grantees to do this research. The grantees are able to hide the data. And, you would think, well, if their data was any good, they would share it with people. They would share it with interested parties, but they don't. It's been secret. It's been secret for almost 30 years and remains so. Well, about 9 years ago, I came up with a way to circumvent EPA's secret science. I created my own data set. I found out that in the state of California, they have electronic death certificates, which you can get. And they have some of the best air quality data available. So I got the death certificates, I got the air quality data, and I ran just a quick and dirty calculation, and you can see the results here. This is for the South Coast Air Basin, which is the air around Los Angeles. As PM2.5 concentration goes up, fewer people are dying. Okay, that's exactly the opposite of what you would expect. So based on this quick and dirty analysis, I got some friends of mine to do the largest, best conducted PM2.5 epidemiology study of all time. They looked at virtually every death that occurred in California for the years 2000 and 2012. These are world-class statisticians. Their study showed that there was no correlation between PM2.5 or ozone and short-term death. And best part of all, they're willing to make their data available to the public. No secret science. This is the study. And there's a link to it if you're interested in getting a hold of the study. Now, as we get to near the end here, the Trump administration, I worked with the Trump administration on PM2.5 to get things right. And in the United States, every 5 years, you have to review the PM2.5 air quality standards to see if they need to be tightened. Well, the Trump administration did that in 2019, 2020, and this is a letter from the EPA's board of outside experts to EPA on their review of the science, and they concluded that the extant PM2.5 science does not provide a sufficiently comprehensive, systematic understanding of the health impacts of PM2.5 due to a lack of comprehensive, systematic review of the relevant literature. There is inadequate evidence and rationale for causal determinations, and a need for a clear discussion on causality and causal biological mechanisms. So this represents the Trump administration represents a complete rejection of the previous EPA's notion that any exposure to PM2.5 can kill people. So as a result of this, the air quality standards were not tightened, which we had some success. And we've just talked about PM2.5. I can do this for ozone too. People love to say ozone triggers asthma. No, ozone triggers lying. EPA has a raft of clinical studies where people are exposed to, old people and sick people, exposed to very high levels of ozone, no asthma triggered. That's the end of my presentation. If you have questions or want to contact me, this is how you do it.